As I already said, my kid is not afraid of anything, even you." Commander Noran's eyes flitted in shock. He had seen a lot in his years of duty, but this person standing in front of him, composed and peaceful, appeared to go against all he had learnt. "We are facing your best military, yet you stand here talking about offspring? Is this some joke?" The battlefield outside the window was a storm of chaos, with explosions shaking the ground and soldiers scurrying for cover as the enemy's war machine advanced. However, here stood the human, unarmed, wearing only a basic combat suit and no armor, talking about his child as if they were taking a leisurely stroll through the park. Noran cleared his throat in an attempt to regain his composure. "We have demolished your colonies and annihilated your ships. Instead of bragging about your boldness, you ought to be pleading for forgiveness." For a moment, Noran felt the weight of those words, but he quickly dismissed them as bravado. The human father simply shook his head, a smile of amusement forming at the corner of his lips. "You don't get it, do you?" he asked. "My kid isn't afraid because he's been raised on a planet where everything is trying to kill you this war." Humans were notoriously conceited and always believed they were better than others, but this was different. This wasn't conceit, rather, it was something more profound and unnerving. The human's voice was calm, but it was more than simply assurance. It was experiencing your kind's fixation on surviving your terrible here. The world is meaningless, and you cannot undervalue the might of our forces. Even though the animals underworld are frightening, they lack the organization and strategic brilliance that we have. Sure, you have flashy weaponry and clever strategies. The human interrupted his tone to steady everyone, but that's not the point. You keep thinking that we fight to win, but we don't fight because we want to, we fight because we have to, and you gave us no choice. The human said, looking at the enormous alien war machines that loomed in the distance, but none of it matters when you're fighting someone who doesn't care about danger. Have you never had to deal with that? Have you tightened your claws around your command staff? You think your child would survive the horror we've unleashed upon your world? Subordinates hurried to transmit commands and scrambled to keep the invasion organized as one of the alien dreadnoughts outside unleashed another round of artillery, but the human didn't even flinch. "Do you know what terror is, Commander?" The man's voice was oddly quiet as he asked. "Now, fear is watching your child climb the tallest tree in the forest knowing it could snap at any second. Fear is when they try to outrun a predator twice their size and laugh while doing it. And you're just another predator in our jungle," he said. "And you're just another predator in our jungle." How could this human be so calm? "I'm tired of your games," human Noran growled. "Your child will face our soldiers soon enough, and when they will comprehend true fear." There was a long silence between them as the sounds of war raged outside. Noran studied the human, looking for any signs of weakness, tremor in his hands, or a hint of fear in his eyes, but there was none. The human wasn't bluffing, he truly believed every word he said. "You should be afraid of my son," the human continued, finally breaking the silence, "because while you're out here thinking you're invincible, he's growing up learning how to deal with monsters much worse than you. When he gets here, when we all arrive, you're going to wish you had left us alone. When the actual battle starts, we'll see how brave your kid is and how your fearless species fared against our best warriors." Noran's patience finally gave out, and he shouted, brandishing his command staff. Looking at the commander's staff, the human shrugged. "You still don't get it." "The fight has already begun, Commander." Noran said almost upsetly, "I told you my son is not afraid of anything, and neither am I." He didn't understand why his forces were the most advanced in the galaxy. They had destroyed countless civilizations before this. How could one parent and one human shake him so deeply before Noran could react? The ground shook again, but this time it wasn't from alien artillery. The human's eyes shifted slightly towards the horizon, where a plume of smoke and dust was rising. Noran followed his gaze and hesitated for the first time in his career because the human wasn't boasting or bluffing at that moment. He was just stating a fact. The distant dust plume grew larger by the second, and Commander Noran squinted his eyes in an attempt to see through the haze. His finely tuned soldiers moved into defensive positions, bracing for whatever attack the humans had prepared, but he was unable to see what was coming. The human father next to him appeared unfazed, as if this chaotic scene was as commonplace as a light rain. What are they? Norin inquired in a perplexed tone. The person cocked his head in contemplation for a time. Oh, those are just the children. Children are always part of the fight, Commander, not in the way you think. The human replied calmly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. You have this idea that war is about numbers and technology, but it's actually about the mindset that's been taught and passed down. These kids grew up learning how to survive from day one. Noran's mandibles clicked in disbelief. Children, you're sending children into battle. In the distance, Noran's scanners finally caught a glimpse of what was approaching, figures running in coordinated formations, bounding over terrain with an impossibly fast speed and precision that took a lifetime of military training to perfect. These weren't hardened soldiers, though. They were younger, smaller, and had the same focus and determination as any veteran Noran had ever seen. No species worth its salt would dare send its young to the front lines, but the humans spoke with such as children were prepared for fight in a species so enmeshed in hostilities that even their progeny were included in the battle plan. Despite the facts in front of him suggesting otherwise, Noran whispered to himself, and the human laughed, "Oh, it's very possible. You just didn't anticipate that we would push this far. You assumed that we would give in, but you have forced us to do this without giving us an option." A tall, sharp-eyed officer called Dreek, Noran's second-in-command, hurried up to the commander. "I've never seen anything like this before. The oncoming troops seem young, yet their strategy is flawless. We're not sure, but every reading we have shows that they're human adolescents and they're developing quickly." Noran's head swung towards Drac, his skepticism growing. How can juveniles connect with this degree of skill? Drac paused, his tone falling. With his thoughts racing, the alien commander returned his attention to the human father. He almost couldn't bear the thought of bringing them here. There has to be more to this, some deeper human trick, some unidentified element that would account for this insanity. The person shrugged. "You brought them, we didn't." The human said in a steady voice, "You came for our cities and towns that we didn't ask for this war, but you started it, and once you did, you involved all of us." Noran's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "You attacked our homes," he said. "You think there's a difference between adults and kids in a world like that?" Dreek interrupted the commander, saying, "Ours is not on Earth, not after what you've done." "They're nearly in range. Should we?" Before he could complete it, Noran's head whipped towards the battlefield as the ground shook, and he saw something he had never thought possible. The human adolescents weren't running blind at last, and they were cooperating in almost perfect synchronization, avoiding heavy fire and flanking the larger alien war machines with a defying ease. Their movements were fluid, their formations tight, and Commander, they weren't faltering, Track reported, his voice barely concealing his surprise. The human children were forcing his highly skilled soldiers to flee, avoiding their advanced weapons with tactics that seemed far beyond their years. Noran could barely comprehend the scene unfolding before him as his vast and formidable forces were being overrun by what seemed to be little more than a group of highly organized children. These juveniles are not panicking, they are pushing forward like seasoned troops. The human father observed quietly, with a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "I told you, Commander, that neither he nor his companions are afraid of anything." The tremor in Noran's chest spread as he stared at the battlefield, watching his elite forces crumble under the coordinated assault of human adolescents. He had always thought of humans as irresponsible, emotionally driven creatures, but this was something far more terrifying. They weren't just fighting back, they were thriving in the chaos. Drill's voice broke the silence. Noran's fist clenched. Fear wasn't an emotion he often felt, but something was gnawing at him now, something that went beyond simple confusion. He had underestimated the humans at every turn, and now he was paying for it. These children weren't just fighting, they were winning. Noran growled, "This is madness." Noran's heart was racing as the implications set in. He had underestimated the humans, but worse than that, he had not understood their greatest strength, their capacity to adapt and overcome fear to include every generation in the fight. His eyes met the humans once again, and his expression said more than words could. Noran knew then that they had set off something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. the alien war robots' retreat and the disarray of their defeat were evident across the battlefield. His trained and disciplined warriors were being outmaneuvered and overtaken by a surge of human youth who battled with an intensity and accuracy that beyond comprehension, reducing once scary emblems of frightening strength to burning wreckage strewn over the landscape. No matter how hard his forces fought, they were unable to match the relentless pressure being applied by the humans. They moved too quickly, thought too creatively, and worst of all, they had no fear. "How are they doing?" This Drake gasped, barely maintaining his composure as he watched the battlefield collapse. "They're just children, so we should be eradicating them with ease." Norrin barked into his communicator, but the command was drowned out by the din of explosions and gunfire. For the first time in his career, Norrin was unable to respond. He lacked a plan or strategy that might change the situation. The human father, standing next to him, calm despite the carnage, gave a straightforward explanation. "You're losing because you believed that war was about overwhelming force, but to us, it's about survival. It's what we do every day. Your soldiers are trained for battle, ours is what we're raised for." His brilliant tactical mind had encountered something it had never prepared for, an enemy that not only endured chaos, but thrived in it. "We are the most sophisticated species in the galaxy, therefore you humans shouldn't be able to beat us. Instead, you should have given up the human race." Norrin tightened his hands, unwilling to accept this destiny. "You underestimated us," he said with a shrug and an almost compassionate face. "Because our planet is hazardous, Commander, you perceived humans as weak. However, the thing about growing up on a dying world is that it makes us stronger, and our children are prepared for anything. Human adolescence is now encroaching, causing the remainder of Norran's soldiers to fall into chaos." Norrin was astounded to see how well these young beings battled. Their cooperation was flawless, yet their movements were erratic. When the human attack reached the heart of the alien defenses, an explosion rocked the command center, throwing Norrin and his officers off their feet. Smoke filled the air, and the earth shook. The towering alien war engines that had destroyed so many planets were no match for them. Norrin scurried to his feet, his thoughts racing for a fix or a method to save this catastrophe, but it was too late. The command center's door exploded, and a small group of human adolescents, covered in dust and grime from the battlefield, their eyes focused and sharp, and their weapons held with practiced ease despite their youthful appearance, were led by a boy no older than 14. His face was set in a determined scowl, and Norran's eyes widened in disbelief. The human father smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's my son." The boy looked at his father, then back to Norrin. A tall, sharp-eyed officer called Drake, Norrin's second-in-command, hurried up to the commander. "I've never seen anything like this before. The oncoming troops seem young, yet their strategy is flawless. We're not sure, but every reading we have shows that they're human adolescents and they're developing quickly." Norran's head swung towards Drake, his skepticism growing. How can juveniles connect with this degree of skill? Drake paused, his tone falling. With his thoughts racing, the alien commander returned his attention to the human father. He almost couldn't bear the thought of bringing them here. There has to be more to this, some deeper human trick, some unidentified element that would account for this insanity. The person shrugged. "You brought them, we didn't." The human said in a steady voice, "You came for our cities and towns that we didn't ask for this war, but you started it, and once you did, you involved all of us." Norran's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "You attacked our homes," he said. "You think there's a difference between adults and kids in a world like that?" Expression was one of cold, calculated understanding, and for a moment, Norrin saw something that made him shudder. These humans were driven by necessity, not anger or hatred. The kid's eyes hardened, and he said, "Stand down." His voice was firm and cool, and he continued, "You've lost." Norran's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Lost. We are the strongest force in the galaxy, and we cannot be defeated by children. Not only us, but everyone behind the boy is also in agreement." Additional people poured into the command center, quickly and effectively protecting the area. Unquestionably defeated, Noran's officers remained frozen, demoralized, and uncertain of what to do. Trying to understand how this human race and these animals from a dying world had defeated his armies so completely, Noran stumbled backward. You never understood us. You saw us as weak because we had to fight every day to survive, but that's exactly what made us strong. The human father stated quietly as he walked over to stand next to his son. Have you never faced anything like Earth before? Have you? Noran's breath come in ragged gasps as forces his empire. Everything he had worked so hard to achieve was falling apart in front of him, and it wasn't because of better technology or huge numbers. Rather, it was because these people had something that his species didn't have, a toughness that came from knowing that the only way to survive was to keep going no matter what. The weight of his failure was spoken by Noran. Crushing him, the boy lowered his weapon a little and studied the alien commander with a mixture of resolve and sympathy. You thought we'd give up, you thought we'd be afraid, but we don't fear danger, Commander. Noran slumped against the wall, grasping the full weight of his defeat. The human father said softly, you lost everything. We are our history, our struggle, our will to survive. You never stood a chance. The children of this war-hardened species, a species that had grown strong by surviving the worst their world had to offer, had brought down powerful forces, not the adults he had anticipated facing. Noran closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of combat. He had believed that his race was unbeatable because to their unparalleled technical prowess, but in the end, something far stronger than them, the human spirit, had triumphed.